Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This is Eisenherz and today I want to give you guys a quick method on whether or not you should be paying for Rhystic Study. I often see players deal with this question without a methodical approach and act way too randomly. This often hinders them from presenting a reasonable win attempt and also leads to the Rhystic Study player drawing way more cards than they probably should be. So let's look at 3 questions you should ask yourself in order to assess whether or not to pay for Rhystic Study. Question 1. What is my own game plan? This is pretty straightforward. Turbo decks and mid-range or control decks can and should deal with Rhystic Study way differently. If you are playing for the long game, there is very little drawback in paying the 1 for the Rhystic Study. While you are slowly but surely developing your board, sculpting your hand and grinding value, you are also making sure that the Rhystic Study player does not get too far ahead of you. This doesn't mean that you should pay all the time, but if you can pay without disrupting your game plan significantly and without tapping out against turbo decks, you probably should pay. If, however, you're playing the fast game and you need to feed the Rhystic Study in order to turbo out a win, you probably should. As the game continues, the Rhystic Study player will draw more and more cards in order to outvalue you and interact with your win attempts. The turbo window is clearly in the early game, so make use of this window while you have a chance. Also keep this in mind when a player asks for a fish pact or a Rhystic Study pact. If they ask you to not feed the Rhystic Study or the fish in the early game, it is probably because they benefit of a longer game. Don't let your own game plan be disrupted by that. If you play turbo, don't shift into the control mindset. And of course, if you are playing mid-range or control, try to make sure that your turbo players don't feed the Rhystic Study too much. Question number 2. Who is ahead? If the Rhystic Study player is already ahead of the table, paying for their Rhystic Study is probably the better choice in order to not have them run away with the game completely. This obviously ties in on what you are trying to do on your turn. Or of course what you are potentially not doing because you want to pay for the Rhystic Study or keep mana open in order to have interaction available. A late game mana dork, for example, is probably not worth casting if it also means that you feed the Rhystic Study player who is already way ahead of the table. On the other hand, you might have to feed the Rhystic Study player if you want to deploy a stacks piece that will stop them, or if you have a wheel which will reset the card balance. If, however, the Rhystic Study player is not ahead of the table and does not have a reasonable way to present a win attempt soon, you might not want to pay for the Rhystic Study because it will allow you to further your game plan more efficiently, and it will also allow them to draw cards in order to deal with the player who is actually ahead of the table. In this scenario, casting a mana rock without paying for the Rhystic Study is probably worth it because it gets you closer to your win, and it also potentially allows the Rhystic Study player to find interaction in order to stop the player who is ahead of the game and might present a win attempt soon. The same is obviously true if an opponent is trying to present a win attempt through another opponent's Rhystic Study. You might want to help with the interaction and not pay for the Rhystic Study so that the Rhystic Study player can draw more cards, find more interaction and stop the player who is presenting a win right then and there. And if there are 2 players with card draw engines in play, like Rhystic Study, Fish or Esper Sentinel, you want to make sure to rebalance the cards in their hand. So if one player has a lot of cards in their hand and another player does not have a lot of cards in their hand, you want to make it so that you pay the triggers in such a way that the player who does not have a lot of cards in hand draws more cards, which will rebalance the card advantage between those 2 players, and then they can deal with each other while you are furthering your own game plan. Question number 3. Can I win now? Oftentimes you will have to present a win attempt through an opponent's Rhystic Study. And when you're doing that, you have to be aware of a lot of things at once. The first thing you have to be aware of is how much mana you have, how much mana you need to cast your combo pieces, how much mana you need to cast your interaction spells, and how much money you need to pay for the Rhystic Study. The next thing you have to be aware of is how many cards do my opponents actually have, how many cards will they potentially draw, and how many interaction spells have they already used up. If your mana is super tight, your opponents have a lot of cards in hand already and did not use a lot of interaction during the course of the game, your forced win attempt will probably lead to disaster. The study player will draw even more cards and you will open up a window of opportunity for the next player or the Rhystic Study player to just present a win. If, however, you have enough mana to pay for your combo pieces, all the Rhystic Study triggers and interaction, then of course do so. The trickiest situations are those where you can pay for your combo pieces and your interaction spells or the Rhystic Study triggers. In that case, it is usually better to hold up mana for interaction. The chance of your opponent finding interaction spells from the few cards you make them draw doesn't compare to the upside you have from being able to cast 1, 2, 3 or more interaction spells in order to protect your winning line. With all that being said, keep in mind that these are just rough guidelines, a simplified approach. There just is no cookie cutter answer on whether or not you should be paying for Rhystic Study in any given scenario, because the variance in cEDH with pot composition, turn order, and cards you see in the game is just too high. However, having a simple methodical approach will allow you to make better gameplay decisions and play more efficiently in the long term. And that's it for today. If you enjoy my content, please make sure to like, share, comment and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, hop over to my Discord server, and please consider becoming a patron. I have different tiers set up, and I also provide one-on-one coaching for those of you who want to bring their piloting to the next level. Thank you for watching my videos. This is Eisenherz and auf Wiedersehen.